Pacific, here on C-SPAN. Australian voters cast ballots today on a proposal to remove Britain's Queen Elizabeth as their head of state and to replace her with an Australian president elected by Parliament. Now, a look at the results of the referendum vote from the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, recorded at 5:30 a.m. Eastern Time, when it was 9:30 p.m. in Sydney. The program is about an hour.
Welcome to the ABC's special referendum coverage being broadcast nationally and to Canada and the United States. Today, Australia decided no to the idea of becoming a republic, and it has rejected a new preamble to the Constitution. The yes case for a republic was defeated in all of the eastern seaboard states, except Victoria, where it remains line ball. South Australia gave an emphatic no, while only the ACT, or the Australian Capital Territory, has said yes. Of course, it's still early in the count for Western Australia, and I'm joined now by Anthony Green, our election analyst, to update on the figures. Anthony, what's the overall picture?
Well, we have an overall summary graphic of the position as we see it at this stage. Of course, a referendum needs a majority of votes and a majority of states, and it's clearly failed on those grounds. New South Wales has got roughly, with all the vote in, 46.6%. Victoria's 50%, probably with roughly the end of the count tonight. Queensland has only voted 37.3% yes. There's only a tiny figure in so far from Western Australia. South Australia has voted 43.7% yes, Tasmania 40.2%, and nationally the figure is 45.7%. There's a 63% vote in the ACT, and the Northern Territory is roughly 50-50 at this stage.
OK, Anthony, before you go on, Kerry Jones, who has run the No campaign, a constitutional monarchist, has just arrived at her headquarters to claim victory.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry that Malcolm Turnbull conceded defeat before we'd actually heard from the people of Western Australia. I was hoping to wait and hear how they had voted. But he has conceded defeat. So we're here to say that we're thrilled that the No case has won a resounding victory. Obviously today is a very, very special day in the history of our great country, Australia. The Australian people have had their say and they have said no. There are millions of Australians from all over the country who rejected this republic on offer today. All of us are deeply humbled by the confidence that the Australian people have shown in our country, our Constitution. We've heeded the message that this republic is not the way. We actually do not feel greatly elated, but we do, however, feel a great sense of relief that a fundamentally flawed Republican model has gone down. And that the Australian people have finally had a chance to have their say on this issue. This has genuinely, ladies and gentlemen, our campaign over 6 years been the people's protest. The No campaign has not won the day, however. It is the Australian people who have won the day. I'd like to offer our commiserations to Malcolm Turnbull and the Yes campaign team. Genuinely, I would like to. The Yes campaign is actually full of good Australians who want the best for their country too. This vote means the country did not find favour with their vision for Australia. It's my wish and the wish of all of those involved in the No campaign that Australians who voted yes will join together with us so we can all celebrate the centenary of Federation as a united nation. All of us want the best for our country. All of us are proud Australians. Let's accept the umpire's decision and let's remain united in the decision. This victory tonight is claimed not on behalf of one group of Australians over any other. Let this result be celebrated by all Australians as a victory for our democracy. I'd like to particularly thank the millions of Australians, and it is millions of Australians, who I've never met. I've never met them, but they've cast their vote for Australia today. They cast a no vote because this sort of republic was not for them. I have a few thank yous that must be made tonight, and I felt I had a lot of trouble in putting these thank yous together because there are millions of Australians.
And we'll leave Kerry Jones there for now because obviously we should be hearing from others as well. And a few minutes ago, Malcolm Turnbull made an emotional speech reflecting on the campaign and his side's defeat. This is what he had to say.
The proudest day of my life was today when I cast a vote for an Australian republic. All of us who voted yes can be proud tonight. We did what was right. And when in years to come, our children or our grandchildren ask us why Australia has the Queen or the King of England as our head of state, we can look them in the eye truthfully and say, on November the 6th, 1999, I voted yes for our republic. I thank every Australian who voted yes. I thank you for your patriotism, your optimism and your pride. The Republic will come back, not as soon as we'd like it to come, but it will return, and I hope we all live to see it. To those Republicans who voted no, thinking they will soon get another chance to vote, I'm afraid you have been had. Nothing would please me more than there being another early chance to vote for a republic. But the people who made those promises to you will do nothing to keep them. As the years roll on without a republic, do not forget, never forget, who told you to vote no with the promise of a referendum for a directly elected president. A promise they never, ever intended to keep. Now today's referendum was the culmination of a 9-year campaign. The Australian Republican movement should be proud of its achievements. We didn't win this vote today in the Republic debate, but without your tireless efforts, there would have been no Republic debate. There would have been no... Thank you. There would have been no constitutional convention, no referendum. Because of our struggle, the Republic is indelibly on the Australian political agenda. Together we put it there. Fighting for the Republic in John Howard's Australia has been gruelling and heartbreaking. But are we further ahead today than we were in 1996? Yes. Our Republican cause united Australians in a way we've never seen before. Who would have imagined we'd have had Peter Costello, Kim Beazley and Natasha Stott-Despoja wearing the same campaign badge? What else but such a great objective could unite Fraser and Whitlam, Doug Anthony and Bob Hawke?
And that is what Malcolm Turnbull had to say a few moments ago in conceding defeat. We've heard from Kerry Jones from the No case, but there's another element of that coalition, and it has been a very important element. Ted Mack, who effectively ran the No case on behalf of those supporting a directly elected president, joins me now. Ted Mack, you heard what Malcolm Turnbull had to say. He said that those who supported your call for a no vote have been had if they are expecting that there'll be another referendum in the near future.
Well, I can understand Malcolm being a little bitter after all the work he has put in, and he certainly has put in a lot of work, and I think he's to be congratulated on that. But we are going to become a republic. And I mentioned earlier tonight that the reason we've had a false step in this first go is that we didn't listen to the people, because 70% want the right to vote if we become a republic. That figure's been constant for 3 years. I'd also like to point out that at the Constitutional Convention, the model of a republic that we downed today by roughly 46, that was exactly the proportions it was downed at the Constitutional Convention by the elected delegates. So nothing has changed. We simply haven't listened to the people. Next time, when we go to a referendum with a directly elected president of some variety, we'll have the thing carried.
Who in Australian politics, elected politics, is going to give Australians the opportunity of another referendum?
Well, Kim Beazley has promised a very good start tonight by having that plebiscite that I talked about earlier tonight. And I think that is obviously the first step. We've got to have a simple plebiscite on breaking links with the monarchy, so that then we can move on to decide what sort of republic we're going to become.
But don't you think it's relevant to the future of this debate that the yes case was so soundly beaten around Australia with your help? Not only in every state, with the possible exception of Victoria, but the national vote generally.
Of course it was soundly beaten. As I keep saying, 70% of Australia want the right to vote if we become a republic. That's why it was beaten.
So
I can't understand why the media of Australia have not recognised this for the last 3 years.
Are you saying that you expect this debate to stay on the agenda from tomorrow on?
Well, because you've got a lot of very unhappy people, because 2/3 of Australia want to become a republic. It is now a political issue and will be a major issue at the next election.
And how do you expect to persuade those Republicans who voted strongly yes and would feel somewhat bitter about your opposition to them on this occasion? How will you manage to get them onto your cart?
I think if they really believe in a republic, they're not going to turn around now and vote for a monarchy against a directly elected republic.
But if you expected them to give respect to your argument for a direct election, surely you must respect their sincerity in having genuine concerns about the risks involved in a directly elected president in what has previously been a non-political position.
Well, I don't think there are any risks in a directly elected president. 91 republics around the world have some form of direct election, and I'm quite sure there'll be no risk whatsoever. Most people who voted yes to this republic simply want to break links with the monarchy. They're going to vote for a republic as long as it's a sensible model, which it will be, and they're certainly going to support a republic at any future referendum.
Ted Mack, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And we might now go back to Anthony Green, our election analyst, to continue analysing the figures. Anthony?
Well, first off, we were interrupted, so we'll have a look at the national breakdown for the preamble referendum. And as you can see there, the figures are about 5% lower in this referendum than they were in the Republic referendum, and it's gone down solidly with a vote of less than 40% across the country. The next thing we'll look at is we'll just update the figures for Victoria, and then we'll come to the newer states. In Victoria now we've got the Republic has just pulled ahead. The yes vote has just Australia, I'm sorry. That's the national figure, 45.7%. In Victoria, it's 50.1, so it looks like Victoria will be neck and neck, line ball, whatever metaphor you like to use. The Northern Territory next, which we haven't seen yet tonight. It's rather difficult to determine where this figure will end up at the end. It's 49.8% yes, but the vote that hasn't been counted is all the mobile votes, which most of the Indigenous population used to vote. So that'll be determined by how the Indigenous population vote. In WA, we have a very small count so far. It's only 1.4%. The yes is 35.8%. That's better than I would have expected, but if it follows the trend of all the other states, it will not rise to reach 50%. So that's one watch over the next half hour or so.
Okay. And we're joined now by two veteran politicians, now retired, who between them chaired the pivotal constitutional convention early last year, which was the preamble to setting up this debate and this referendum. Ian Sinclair, former National Party leader and former coalition minister in previous governments. Barry Jones, former science minister under Labor governments. Ian Sinclair, first of all, your general observations about tonight and the significance of the vote?
Well, I think the vote, given the fact that the Prime Minister was opposed and the considerable uncertainties engendered by the no case, I think that the yes vote did remarkably well. I don't really think that in most instances people knew what they were voting about. I've been interested that the informal vote was so low, which rather suggests that those who weren't too sure voted no rather than voting informal, as they might have in an ordinary poll. Having said that, I think the most disappointing result from the government's perspective must be the result in the preamble, because certainly a great deal of effort was put into trying to produce a preamble, and while it was a bit of an afterthought and hasn't been on the front of the agenda, I think that it went down to so much a greater degree than the Republic question really must raise serious doubts about whether or not, in terms of constitutional reform in the future,
what has been in terms of what that preamble was designed to achieve, what do you think has been lost with that no vote?
Well, to start with, you had both the Leader of the Government and the Leader of the Opposition supporting it. You had no significant voice against it. But what's been lost is the fact that there was a chance to show that although the Republican question did not get up, there might have been some chance of constitutional change. And frankly, I think that the result of the preamble question, perhaps even more of that in the Republic, suggests that it is going to be very difficult indeed to get constitutional change through the Australian electorate in the future.
Barry Jones, you must be extremely disappointed.
I am extremely disappointed because I think in a way, I've always thought that in some way, the biggest difference in this campaign was not really between Republicans and monarchists, but really between those who took an essentially optimistic view of Australia, its political institutions and its political robustness, and those who took a pessimistic view. And I've tried actually to take as neutral a position as I can in my role as the co-chair of ConCon and later on of Australia Deliberates, and I've really taken no part in public debate on this. But what had really troubled me a lot is that fundamental demonising of the political process, the demonising of our parliament, and what I thought was the most extraordinary contradiction that my namesake, near namesake, Kerry Jones used to come out with, where she'd say, we've got the world's best political system, wonderful political system, but on the other hand, you couldn't trust the political institutions in it, that they'd act in a way that was corrupt, that was devious, that defeated the public interest. Now, you can't have both positions. And the other thing that was fundamentally disappointing about it all, and reflects the failure to understand what the nature of the Constitution is, there's a fundamental gap between the system, as the Prime Minister kept saying he thinks wonderful and never change, and the Constitution. But the Constitution doesn't have any reference to the system as we have it now. The Constitution says all power is in the hands of the Governor-General. There is in the Constitution no reference to a Prime Minister, no reference to a Cabinet, no reference to a Westminster system, no reference to democracy, no reference to the concept of Australian citizenship.
This is very eloquent, Barry, but of course you must have been very frustrated in deciding not to say all this during the campaign. Campaign's done and gone now. How long before Australians, do you think, given what happened tonight, how long, if ever, before Australians revisit this question?
I think it'll be a long time before there's another poll, but what's going to happen is, I think, there will be an erosion of national confidence, I fear, because I cannot see a regrouping around the House of Windsor. It cannot be a unifying basis.
Okay. We'll have to leave it there for the moment. Hopefully we might come back to you a little later, but of course, there are a number of interesting players, and have been a number of interesting players in this debate. One of the most interesting, of course, Peter Costello, Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party and Federal Treasurer, and an avowed Republican. During the campaign, he engaged in a remarkable debate with his own Prime Minister on the issue. He spoke with us just a few minutes ago and had this to say. Peter Costello, you must be somewhat disappointed, at least, by this figure. Well, so I suppose a 3 percentage point difference between yes and no majority nationally, and at best, one state, Victoria, voting yes.
Well, of course I'm disappointed because I thought that this was a safe and secure change, and I thought and still think that Australia is predominantly Republican. So I'm disappointed in that sense. Am I surprised? I'm not surprised. In fact, I thought that the vote would probably be worse. We've never had a constitutional change in this country which has been given the tick without bipartisan support. In fact, we've had many lose even when they had bipartisan support. So I thought it was pretty obvious from the outset that the referendum would lose. That result disappoints me, but it doesn't surprise me, of course.
You've got some very interesting figures in terms of breakdowns of seats, and of course in the Prime Minister's own seat of Bennelong, 55% voted yes to a republic. In Warringah, Tony Abbott, your fellow minister's seat, who was a monarchist, 55% again. Higgins, 64% yes to a republic. Ted Mack, the direct electionist, 62% yes to a republic. Now, in terms of what happens politically inside the Liberal Party from now in terms of the future of the Republican debate, what does that strong Liberal support do for a republic?
Well, I'm not surprised that many of the Liberal seats voted yes. My own seat voted 64% yes, and of course I was supporting the yes vote. But there were a lot of Liberals that felt that Australia will have to move on and become a republic, and this was a safe and secure way of doing it. And so I wasn't surprised that there were Liberals that were voting yes. What actually surprised me in the result was that there were so many Labor seats that voted no. And particularly if you look at Sydney, there are a lot of Labor seats, or where were seats like Greenway and so on, that were voting no. If the Labor vote had held, you would have carried New South Wales. The Labor vote held a lot better in the Melbourne Labor seats, and that's why Victoria might be the only state that's voted yes. But at the end of the day, what lesson do we draw from this? Well, I think we draw the lesson that we now really know that Australia doesn't warmly and emotionally any longer endorse monarchy. So we're probably clear on what we're not for. What we're not quite agreed on is what we are for. But that's the great challenge now.
In terms of, though, how this debate runs inside the Liberal Party, does it mean that until the next election at least, you put your Republican bat and ball back in the cupboard in the interest of party unity?
Well, the views I have tonight are the views I've always had, that in our hearts and our heads we're Republican, and our Constitution ought to reflect it. The question for the Liberal Party is, does it go to another referendum? And I think the general view in the Liberal Party has been, we promised a referendum. This was the chance to vote yes. We've done our duty. Everybody had a free vote. The yes vote did very well, but it didn't carry a majority. Now, I don't think you can poll these things endlessly. I think this was a pretty safe, minimal change. And I make this point, Kerry, if constitutional inertia won the day, and I think it did, on a small change, there's no mandate to say it would have gone better on a big change. And I think the key to all of this is to look at the preamble. The preamble, incidentally, had bipartisan support, and yet it's been defeated. Now, I don't think that's because people in Australia were saying, oh, they're against recognition of Aboriginal people. It's because overwhelmingly the attitude was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, don't interfere with the Constitution, vote no. And that's the attitude that I think was the principal reason why the Republic's gone down, not because people were saying we're against minor changes and we're actually in favour of radical changes.
Very briefly, bipartisanship might have made the difference this time. It's entirely possible 3-4 years from now that there will be a Liberal Republican leader and a Labor Republican leader. Entirely possible, do you concede, that you might then be able to mount a bipartisan case for a republic that has a better chance of getting up?
Well, look, I'm not going to go into hypotheticals about the future, but I'll make one point about the past, and it's this, that history's shown us that Australians are conservative on their constitutions, and they generally vote no even when there's bipartisan support, and they always vote no when there's not bipartisan support. And if anything would surprise you about the outcome, it would surprise you that this got so close when none of the preconditions which are required to carry a referendum were actually existing.
Peter Costello, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks very much, Kerry.
Liberal Republican Peter Costello, and of course another very interesting figure inside the coalition on the issue of the Republic has been Peter Reith, another senior minister in the Howard government, who is a Republican but supported the no vote because his argument is there should be a directly elected president. Peter Reith is standing by to join me now. Peter Reith, how do you now put the Republic issue back on the agenda for a more radical proposition than the one Australians have just rejected?
Well, a direct election does not have to be a more radical proposal, but there's no doubt that the result tonight demonstrates that you won't get constitutional reform and a conversion to a republic unless the public is satisfied that due respect is given to an absolutely fundamental value in the Australian community, and that is the democratic tradition. And the Australian public have made it very clear that if we are to move to a republic, they intend to be the ones to have a say in who would be the president.
So, as a prominent Australian Republican, how are you going to play your part to put that back on the agenda?
Well, I've been playing my part in this campaign, Kerry. As you know, I've been the only one really on our side to stand up and represent the direct election point of view. There's no question whatsoever with a sort of 54-46 vote that if you'd had a direct election, there's no doubt that could well have made the difference. In terms of how I will manage it, well, I was a Republican last week. I'll be a Republican, a direct election Republican next week.
But will you be a public Republican?
Well, I will obviously play my role within the government, and there'll be a government position. That's no surprise about that, Kerry. There's been a Labor Party position on this whole thing, a position which has been soundly defeated in the result tonight. But as to the future conduct of this debate, again, this whole Republican debate this time has just demonstrated again the obvious, and that is that in the end this is a matter for the Australian people, and the course of this debate in the future will be decided by public opinion.
Well, you know that Kim Beazley has promised a plebiscite under a Labor government that would allow the Australian people to say in the first place a simple yes or no to a republic, so that you do have the opportunity to see whether there is a broad support confirmed for a republic, which would be followed by a process that would try to establish the model. Now, as somebody who believes that ultimately it should be in the hands of the Australian people, you'd support a plebiscite, wouldn't you?
Well, I get the impression from what Kim has been saying, and that is that he, again, still does not want to accept the fact that for the last 2 or 3 years, 60 or 70% of the Australian people have been saying they want direct election. And he's looking for some halfway house to escape and avoid the obvious reality of that. But as to the government's position on it, well, there'll be a government position. But as I say, Kerry, surely now those in the media who have been very strongly supporting the yes case will finally acknowledge that the incredible thing about this whole campaign is that basically it's represented the direct election point of view. ACM ran a campaign not supporting the monarchy. They ran a campaign saying not this republic, a clear inference that the way to go in the future would be a direct election. And I think the numbers are now pretty clear. That is the way to a republic in the future. But as to the course of that debate, that's going to be very much in the public's hands.
What do you think the odds are, very briefly, that you might persuade Peter Costello to your cause?
Well, let's not personalise this. The fact is that, again, this is a matter for public opinion, and I think, it's been a bit of a crushing blow for those media outlets who have been, harassing and foisting upon the Australian people their view of constitutional reform. What this result tonight shows is that they've not been able to engage regional Australia. They've only been able to pick up some of the wealthier suburbs in the main capital cities, but for the rest of Australia, including in Labor seats with low-income socio-economic groups, they've overwhelmingly voted no.
Peter Reith, thanks for talking with us.
Thank you.
And we might just recap at the top of the clock a very brief summary from our analyst Anthony Green as to the overview. Anthony?
We'll just have a look at the national summary. I think it's the quickest way to look at this. And what we're seeing is that, there's the Australian figures, 45.6% yes. That will slide slightly down towards 45%. If you look at the national figure, the national analysis, you can see on a state-by-state basis the breakdown, which has the New South Wales on 46.6. Victoria is the only state which looks like it might vote yes. Queensland solidly voted no. WA, the figures are still too early. South Australia is a solid no, as is Tasmania. And as I said, the national figures falling towards 45%. And as for the preamble, just to summarise, that the vote for the preamble is now down below 40%. So it's still getting down towards the territory of the 88 defeated referendums for that preamble.
Thanks for that, Anthony. And viewers in Western Australia now leave us for a short summary from the Perth newsroom, and I understand that you're watching. We're shortly going to also hear from the BBC about what's happening over there, but you're watching Australia Decides. Well, of course, tonight's result is being broadcast to the United States and Canada, as I said earlier, but it's in Britain, home of our monarch, that the real interest has been felt. The BBC is coming up.
Now, it's amazing that there's anyone left in Australia to vote in the referendum on the Republic. It seems the entire population is either over here for the rugby or working behind a bar in London.
In fact, those Aussies abroad could play a key role in the outcome of the ballot. Our own former backpacker, Kirsten McGregor, reports on the campaign to win the votes of the expats.
We're told Australia is at a crossroads, a country facing a defining moment in its history. But as well as the Rugby World Cup final, there's been the little matter of a referendum on whether Australia should become a republic. The walkabout...
And that's the BBC. While the referendum has dominated the news here in Australia in recent weeks, it has also attracted its share of attention in Britain. In the ABC's London office tonight, George Negus with a special guest.
Thanks, Kerry. With me is Lord Geoffrey Archer, well-known British Conservative politician himself and also very well known as a writer of many successful novels. Lord Geoffrey, good to see you.
Good to see you, George.
Could I ask you this very blunt question? Do you think that most Britons could care less one way or the other about the result now that it appears to be almost certain, if not absolutely certain, that it's going to be a victory for the no vote and Australia will continue to recognise the Queen as the head of state?
I think the British think it's got nothing to do with us at all. That the decision is an Australian decision, and whatever decision you make, we'd obviously abide with. There will be, among the older generation in Britain, a sadness were it to happen, because we feel a very close link with Australia, and we think that link is partly embodied in the monarchy, but it's nothing to do with us. It's a decision for the Australians. That won't mean that there aren't a lot of British today who will be delighted if it's true that in every single state they voted to keep the monarchy.
Are you surprised that it appears to be a pretty overwhelming victory for the no vote, that the Republicans did get wiped?
Well, one has been told that the internal politics of how the question was worded and how the factions worked was not very bright, and that the monarchists did have one cause and got on with it and won their cause. So with that in mind, I'm not surprised. If I'm surprised, it's by the size of the majority, because one kept being told it was very close. When I was last in Australia, they kept telling me it was on a knife edge, we haven't yet decided, the people make up their mind at the last moment. Well, it seems they've made up their mind very clearly.
Well, as somebody put it, it was almost a case where the Republican cause was concerned, that they had the gun pointed at somebody else's head and shot themselves in both feet.
Yes, politicians are very good at that. We did that at the last election. I described it as the Conservative Party being the only group who'd formed a circular firing squad, and it sounds as if the Republicans have formed a circular firing squad.
There was an interesting poll that came, a number of polls, in fact, that came out during the course, the last few weeks of the campaign, that suggested that regardless of what people felt, even those who were opposed to the idea of a republic were also opposed to the idea of the Queen remaining the head of the state in Australia. Polls as low as 9% of people only suggesting that they wanted the Queen to remain the head of state. This is a very interesting question for people here in Britain like yourself.
George, I am not interested in polls. I'm interested in results. Yeah, but the result was firm and clear.
True, but now we've got a situation where even though Australia's not going to become a republic, the Queen's going to go to Australia next year, highly unpopular with most Australians as a head of state. Probably very popular still in emotional terms with all those historical ties that we've got. But at this stage, a very, very small minority of Australians would be the slightest bit interested in regarding her as the head of state. She's going to pop up there not wanting to be wanted.
I have always found when a member of the royal family went to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, they are treated very respectfully and treated very well. The Australians aren't an ill-mannered race. They're not. If the Olympics, which you've got coming up in Sydney, which every one of us are looking forward to, I'm already booked to go to the Olympics. If she is to open it, which is, I understand the situation, if the vote had been lost today, that she would not open it. If the vote had been won today, they would invite her as head of state to open it. I'd be pretty shocked if she wasn't welcomed for the greatest sporting event on earth.
Well, I guess another way you could put this is to suggest that Australians today have indicated that they knew what they didn't want, right? They didn't want a republic, but they also don't want the Queen as the head of state.
Well, that is the problem with a large population of people who have a vote. In the end, they perhaps cling on to what they've got because they all have different views. Do you want President Keating? Do you want whoever it is?
Because there are some people who suggest that this all started with Paul Keating placing his hand on the Queen's back, or whatever part of the body you choose to describe it as. And the whole thing rolled on from there. And this referendum campaign, unsuccessful for the Republicans, has been the end result. I mean, do you think that Keating was the person who brought this on?
I certainly think when I was over there, when I was over there 3 or 4 times ago, Keating was Prime Minister, and it was very clear that he and Mr Turnbull were pressing very hard. In fact, I dined with Mr Turnbull and was shocked to hear that he was doing a report for the Prime Minister on whether there should be a referendum. I did point out to him, though he's a very distinguished lawyer, his views were already known. In England, if we were to have a report given to the Prime Minister on a subject as important as this, the QC would be neutral, would listen to all the sides and give the report to the Prime Minister. Your Prime Minister received a report from Mr Turnbull which was distinctly prejudiced. So I knew where that side stood, yes.
One other commentator had this comment to make, that it wasn't so much a case of the monarchists winning this referendum, the Republicans lost, and the whole question of the relationship between Australia and the British monarchy remains completely unresolved.
Well, that's what you'll always get from bad losers, George. When people lose something, they should stand up and admit they've lost, not make excuses for it. And you're quite rightly so. Rightly say that this has been put back for some time. It's going to possibly be like the Quebec situation, where you debate it every 4 or 5 years and get the same result every 4 or 5 years. But you mustn't be a bad loser, George. Whatever side has lost should stand up and say, we've lost, and the winners, no doubt the winners are celebrate.
Well, we can still beat you in cricket, and we'll probably beat you in rugby as well.
I have absolutely no doubt you can beat us in cricket, and I congratulate you on the amazing score the Australians have this morning. Don't think we aren't keeping our eyes on you, but we'll get you in the end. But it may be rather a long time.
Jeffrey Archer, good to talk to you.
Good to you too, George.
Thank you, George. And it's somewhat reassuring to hear from Lord Jeffrey Archer that we're not an ill-mannered race. To look at the political implications of this no vote, we're joined now by the 7:30 Report's political editor, Barry Cassidy. Barry, you've heard what some of the main players have had to say, including some very interesting people like Peter Costello and Peter Reith. What are your observations?
Well, clearly the task ahead now for John Howard is to persuade the parliamentary party to put the debate behind them. That's what he'll be demanding, and that's probably what he'll get to a certain extent, though you saw from both Peter Reith and Peter Costello that they will make their views known over the next few days. I think you'll hear from the Prime Minister either later on tonight or sometime tomorrow, appealing to the nation to accept the result with good grace and without recriminations and to move on. But of course, in the background, there will always be this shadow that Kim Beazley has now cast, this question of a plebiscite down the track. And at some point, the coalition will have to deal with that question politically.
How do you think the Prime Minister, what sort of a problem do you think it poses for him? Not just that he's got these senior members of Cabinet who are still Republicans at heart, but that pro-Republican vote in even his own electorate, which was 55% for a republic.
Well, it's a problem for him if he can't brush the issue aside. If it's still around at the next election, then clearly it will be a distraction. You know, that we heard from Senator Nick Minchin earlier tonight. He's already given a response to Kim Beazley's plebiscite idea. He said, what's the point of asking people whether they want a referendum, whether they want a republic when they don't know what's on offer? But I'm sure that it will be argued that that misses this point, that the yes case failed tonight partly because we haven't yet had the debate that perhaps we should have had. And so at some point, I would imagine down the track, the direct electionists and the minimalists will go head-to-head. And it could be a very different situation than what you had tonight, because assuming that the plebiscite gets up and Australians support a republic, then the monarchists will be dealt out of the debate, and I think you will find the minimalists will be in a position to run the scare campaign against the direct electionists, because they will be able to say what we are proposing is a small step, a safe, secure republic against a radically different political model that threatens the Westminster system. You can picture it now. So though the winners tonight, and Peter Reith was quite right when he said the winners tonight were the direct electionists, but when they come head-to-head, it might be a very different story.
I can feel some Australians already getting weary at the thought. Barry, thanks for that, because I think we've got Jim Middleton, the ABC Canberra correspondent, standing by at Kirribilli House, so we'll get some sense of whether the Prime Minister's going to talk tonight. Thank you. And as I said, Jim Middleton, the ABC's political correspondent in Canberra, is standing by at Kirribilli House, waiting to hear any word, and he joins us now. Jim, what can you tell us about the Prime Minister's position tonight, apart from very happy?
I can tell you that the gates of Kirribilli House are firmly shut. The only line to come from the Prime Minister tonight is this one, which saying that he says that the Australian people, having clearly rejected the Republic, that the government will now turn its attention to the things that matter to the people of Australia. Now, behind those locked gates, I have, however, gleaned a little bit more information. The Prime Minister has been watching the results coming in with a great deal of interest with some of his closest advisors and his family. And not surprisingly from John Howard, he's gleaned some broader political lessons, he thinks, from the events of this evening. He's been intrigued, I'm told by his staff, that the further you get from the leafy suburbs, eastern suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne, indeed from the leafy suburbs of the North Shore, that the yes case has done worse. So that is that in places where the aspirational politics of Sydney, for example, out in areas like Lindsay, where Labor would have to do well next time round in the next election, the no vote has been substantially higher than in some of the middle-class suburbs closer to the centre of the city in Sydney and Melbourne. He thinks that this has something to do with the fact that there's a scepticism among those people in the outer suburban areas of Sydney and Melbourne, the same kind of feeling that came through, he thinks, in the Victorian election when Jeff Kennett was rolled. That is, there's a suspicion of big city solutions, of people being told what is good for them, and that he thinks that this augurs rather well for the coalition in the politics leading up to the next election, and not so well for Labor.
Thanks for that, Jim. We've obviously got a bit of static in the atmosphere down there. Perhaps the mobile phones are running hot. But thanks for that.
A pleasure, Kerry.
And we might come back to Anthony Green just to try and get an update, I think, on Western Australia before we move on. And shortly, I trust that we're going to be able to speak to Opposition Leader Kim Beazley.
Yeah, we'll just have a quick look at Western Australia. The figures are now up to about 17.5% counted. And the figure is now... Oh, well, there's the national summary. 40.7% with 15.3% counted on the Republic there, and that's the figure in WA at this stage.
By, right?
That looks like it's definitely headed for defeat in Western Australia as well, because if it follows the trends of the other states, that's not going to reach 50%. And the national figure's now 45.6, probably slide down towards 45% when the whole of WA is in. There's some very interesting trends in terms of, you know, you've got seats like Bennelong, Warringah, Tony Abbott's seat, Higgins, Peter Costello's seat voting solidly, and North Sydney, which is Ted Maxwell's seat, voting solidly yes. Got John Fay, the member for Macarthur, pro-Republican, has only got about 40% yes in his electorate. And you got to a seat like Bonython, the safest Labor seat in South Australia, has only recorded 33% yes. Some of the really safe Labor seats, a solid no vote.
Well, in fact, we've got Labor leader Kim Beazley standing by now, and I'll cross to him now. Kim Beazley, you must be somewhat disappointed, I would think, and asking yourself why you've recorded such low votes in some of those Labor seats.
Not the least bit surprised, Kerry, not at all, as you know from the conversations you've had with me. I rather thought that this was a proposition going down. And I'm not a bit surprised either that it would occur amongst Australians who feel most disenfranchised by the political process. You see, they've been treated with enormous discourtesy by this Prime Minister. He's put in place a process from the Constitutional Convention through to the way in which the question was framed to put a situation to the Australian people which they least wanted put to them. Now, the right way to start this process would have been the way we originally suggested, and that is a plebiscite. To ask them, the Australian people, firstly whether or not they wanted a republic, and assuming, as I think we safely can, that they'd say yes, then ask them what type of republic they wanted. That is the way people feel enfranchised by a process, not disenfranchised. Now, the Prime Minister may well be proud of his result. All he's ended up doing is A, looking backward-looking, and B, putting a proposition to the Australian people in a way clearly large numbers of them resented. Well, we're going to do things differently. And we're not, of course, going to exclusively focus on the Republic. We're going to focus on one or two other things, like the GST, like the need to move our education agenda forward, like public health issues. But it's going to be part of this constitutional reform, part of modernising Australia, part of making Australians feel proud of their institutions and owning their institutions. They've not had that chance today.
But looking at the realities of this vote tonight, regardless of what context you put it in. As I put to you the other night, you've often in the past talked about the good sense of the Australian people. The reality is probably no more than 45% of those who voted have endorsed a republic, and if you've won any states at all, you've only won one, Victoria. Now, by any spin, that surely is a quite clear-cut result.
45% is not bad when you contemplate that the fundamental argument of the political opponents was not, no, not this republic, this monarchy, but simply not this republic. What are we left with? 45% saying, yes, we can accept this republic. The other 55% saying no, but on the basis not necessarily that we like what we've got, but that we want a different sort of republic. We are left without affirmation here, Kerry. This is not a good situation for us to be in.
Okay.
This is a situation of some confusion. Well, don't worry about it, Kerry. We're going to get a chance to fix it, along with a few other problems that the Australian people are experiencing, and we'll have that opportunity 2 years from now.
Okay, 2 years from now is a long road for you to walk before you, let's say hypothetically, win the next election. Let's say you do that and you get the chance to implement your plebiscite. Let's say then the Australian public support that simple plebiscite, yes, no, and endorse a republic. How do you then go about overcoming this great stumbling block between Republicans as to what model?
I think that is, of course, going to be difficult, but the best way to do it is to go through an orderly process. First, ask the fundamental question. Get that out of the road. Then ask the question as to what sort of republic they want. Get that out of the road. And then produce a model that conforms to what they want. I think by then you'll have reached a point where those who are disenchanted with a particular form of republic will nevertheless have got themselves resigned to the outcome. You won't get it by simply throwing it at them in the way in which this referendum has effectively been done. You know, and I don't, and no blame attached to the Republican side as far as that is concerned. The Labor Party did not support the process that we've gone through, but nevertheless we did not take a dog in the manger attitude to it. We tried our level best to make it work. Well, there is a better way of doing it, a better, more consultative, orderly way, and that is the only way that you're likely, in the end, to achieve a result that people can live with that is Republican.
Kim Beazley, thanks very much for talking with us.
Thanks, Kerry.
And Democrats leader Meg Lees, it's fair to say, hasn't had a prominent position in this campaign, although her deputy, Senator Natasha Stott-Despoja, has been arguing very passionately in favour of a republic. Senator Lees is in Adelaide and she joins us now. Meg Lees, how are you reacting to this outcome tonight, and where do you see the republic debate going from here?
I'm very disappointed with where we are tonight, but considering the forces that have lined up against a republic, we've done reasonably well, I think, and the Republican movement should be quite proud of itself. Where we go from here, we agree with the plebiscite. Indeed, the Democrats have been arguing for quite some time we should have discussed various models and put the question, the basic question, perhaps at the time of a federal election, as to whether or not a republic was wanted. We will support whoever is going to now work for a republic, and we will be leading ourselves, but without the Prime Minister, without the final leadership coming from the front, it's going to be impossible. It doesn't matter what model we put up.
Do you acknowledge that, A, the strength of the rejection by Australians tonight, and B, the kind of cynicism abroad generally about political institutions are going to make it very difficult for Republicans to crank up real interest and passion in this debate over at least the next couple of years?
Yes, I have to agree with that. I think that the size of the vote, the fact that it looks like we've only won one state, and looking at in South Australia, we've lost every single federal electorate except a couple of Liberal seats where the local member has been prepared, such as in Adelaide, to actually work for the Yes campaign. It is going to be very difficult to get the momentum going again, and in particular the general level of education and understanding about our Constitution, the fact that this was a simple change. Whatever model we put up, we have to have a better answer to the scare campaign that is going to again be run by the No campaign.
Your new Democrat senator from New South Wales, Aidan Ridgway, was was at the centre of the final framing of the words on the preamble. How do you read the way Australia reacted in so emphatically rejecting that preamble tonight?
Well, it wasn't just Aiden, it was all of us who got to a form that we felt was able to be put to the Australian people. We are disappointed but not surprised with such a strong no campaign led by the Prime Minister, with one of the key arguments being there's no need for change. That flowed over to the preamble, and I doubt, looking at all of what's happened, whether we will ever get a preamble up at all. I think the chances of a preamble are even more remote than a republic.
Meg Lees, thanks for talking with us.
Thank you.
And for those Australians who've just joined us, in particular Western Australians, we're just going to go now to a very brief summary again from our analyst Anthony Green as to the latest figures. Anthony?
Well, again, we'll look at the national summary for the Republican question. As you can see, the WA figures are now up to 27.8% of the vote counted, and the yes vote is on 40.9%. It's been defeated, the referendum has been defeated in New South Wales. It's line ball that it may pass in Victoria. It's been solidly defeated in Queensland and South Australia and Tasmania. And the overall vote is somewhere between 45 and 45.5%. And the second question, the preamble, has been defeated the same way, although it's failed in every state, and with a vote, as you can see there, it's down about 5 or 6% in every state.
Okay, now on our panel tonight we also have our resident constitutional expert for the night in George Williams from the Australian National University. George Williams, in terms of what happens from here with a plebiscite floating around in the wind, the Liberal Party working out what it does from here, John Howard presumably saying to his ministers, it's over for now at least. Put the constitutional context on that against the backdrop of this referendum and previous referendums.
Well, I think what this shows is from this point we must tread very carefully. The last thing we want in this country is constitutional deadlock, where we want some change but people are unable to actually articulate what that change should be. I think Kerry Jones got it right tonight in describing what this result means. It is a clear loss for this model, but I think the result for the Republic generally is far more ambiguous. I think the fact that over the last 6 weeks we've seen the monarchists run largely dead in this campaign means that it's no longer a choice between this model and the monarchy, but indeed what sort of model Australians want. And that opens up a range of possibilities from here.
Sophie Panopoulos, you were there at the Constitutional Convention early last year. You've been very prominent in this campaign. You've crisscrossed the country. What is your read on it?
Well, I think no matter what spin people put on it, it is a smashing defeat for the yes case and for Malcolm Turnbull and the ARM. If you translate these figures into a federal election, it would be a landslide for the no case. And it's interesting, and I feel very proud to have been part of a campaign that I thought was against the odds all the time. We had a lot of the major commercial press, particularly News Limited, against us, the superstars, the celebrities, the money, all against us. And at the end of the day, the Australian people made up their own mind. They weren't influenced by all of that. They were guided by common sense, as they have been in the past when they've decided on changes to the Constitution.
And standing by at Sydney Harbour, we have Jason Yatsen-Lee, who was another prominent younger voice in this campaign for the Republic model. Jason Yatsen-Lee, earlier tonight you were hoping to be preparing for a Goodbye Betty party. Well, I'm afraid it could be Goodbye Republic for some time.
That's right, we're bitterly disappointed, but I think the result today shows that this is not a victory for the monarchy. Australia is a fundamentally Republican country. You know, the Republic spirit will stay alive. We've been defiant tonight and we'll keep on fighting on in the future.
So how are you going to do that? I mean, I would think that given that Australians generally don't particularly like any election process, how are you going to keep the fires burning?
I think the fires will be kept burning by the simple proposition that as an independent country we need our own head of state, and that the King or Queen of England has no place in our future. That in itself will irk people enough to keep the Republican spirit alive, and I'm confident that there will be political leadership in the future that will take us further along the Republican path.
But can you ever conceive a day when you might endorse a directly elected president as the Republican model?
I have no theoretical problems with direct election. What I've always said during this campaign is that it is a radical step. It is a radical change to our system of government, and I'd always believed that constitutional change in Australia has to be step by step. It's got to be evolutionary, which was the thinking behind this model. It didn't try to do the full Monty. It didn't try to go all the way. It preserved the good things about our system of government, but gave us an Australian as head of state.
Do you think that there is a significant number of people on the more moderate model front of the Republican movement who might be prepared to embrace a directly elected president in some form?
I suspect that there will be. It would have to be shown that the model is safe. That was one of the most frustrating things about the no direct election, is they didn't even have a model on offer that we could pick apart. The odds were stacked against us from the beginning. But I believe republicanism in Australia is very, very strong. If we can devise a safe direct election model, I expect widespread support for that.
But in the immediate future facing you, you'd have to acknowledge that the cards are still very much stacked against you.
That's right, and all I can say to that is, to those who, in my view, contributed to the destruction of the Australian Republic tonight, Phil Cleary and Ted Mack, it's over to you. You promised us more reform in the future. You promised us you'd carry the flag. Show us the goods.
OK, Jason Yatsenlee, thanks for that. Now, Ian Sinclair, Barry Jones, going back to what Peter Costello said earlier tonight, his reading of this result is that Australians have said no to small change. How can they ever be persuaded to say yes to big change? And the corollary of that, to that, I suppose, is while Republicans remain divided, the Republic has no chance of happening.
I think there are three elements in it. First is we haven't looked at the details of who voted. We've certainly seen that the lower socio-economic groups generally have resisted change, and that's where Peter Costello's right. But I think equally you've got this total lack of commitment to change at all. And if you're going to have a more radical change, as Peter Costello said, I cannot see that the fundamental requirement, as Barry Jones indicated a while ago, to get a Prime Minister identified, to get the Cabinet identified, to get the system that now applies identified in the Constitution would be essential if you're going to have a directly elected president. And I just don't think that it's likely that in those circumstances that you're going to find that the moderate Republicans, if you like to call those who support the present model, are going to lie flat in the next occasion when there's a referendum. And as Barry Cassidy said, I endorse totally the fact that I think next time round it's unlikely that there's going to be a different result. So I put change to a republic down probably 15, 20 years away.
Barry Jones, are you as pessimistic as Ian Sinclair in that regard, as a Republican?
Well, I think I am pretty pessimistic about it. A couple of things that came out from the polling that we had indicated, first of all, tremendous differentiation between the preparedness of men to vote yes and women. There was something like a 52 to 31% variation. So you had over 20% fewer women who were prepared to commit to any form of change. The second thing is that the nature of the fundamental public education that's required is immense, because the people who do not understand the distinction between the Constitution, the document, 1901, which in some ways was obsolete as on day one, and the existing system which has evolved. Now, have we learnt much after 100 years of experience?
Well, we might still be arguing that in 5 years' time, but Barry Jones and Ian Sinclair, I must thank you both for participating tonight. And while the people of Australia voted on the Republic, the voters in the federal seat of Holt in Victoria were also asked to decide who their next representative would be. The seat became vacant with the resignation of former Labor Minister Gareth Evans. The Liberal Party didn't stand a candidate, and Labor's Anthony Byrne has won 73% of the vote in two-party preferred terms. I think now moving to the big picture, let's sum up what's happened tonight. The answer to the two referendum questions is resoundingly no. No republic, no new preamble to the Constitution. Tasmania, New South Wales, Queensland, Western Australia and South Australia have voted firmly against the Republic, although those Western Australian figures, of course, are still coming in. Victorians appear to have given the Republic a tick, as have the voters in the ACT. In the Northern Territory, it's line ball. So that's it tonight. Thanks for being with us, and of course ABC News and Current Affairs will keep you abreast of the wash-up to Referendum 99 over the next few days. But for now, good night.